My main concern is what I consider to be the drifting away from, a neglect, even an abandonment of the pursuit of truth. Truth of all kinds emanated from and was illuminated by the sacred nature of its source. Truth is a searing, searching matter, not to be dismissed at convenience. The truth I see abandoned is of many different kinds. For that reason, to the casual observer, each might seem unrelated to the others, but they are related, and insight into what makes them all cohere, indeed makes each of them inevitable, comes, as I shall explain, from understanding an aspect of the way in which the brain constructs the world. Solzhenitsyn's Nobel acceptance speech entitled "One Word of Truth." I assume it must have been voiced by an actor, as this man who had suffered every kind of evil in the attempt to break his will and destroy his humanity was not able to deliver the speech in Stockholm in person. The effect on me, in any case, was electrifying. The title, we are told, is from a Russian saying, "One word of truth outweighs the whole world," a saying which, of course, had ineffable weight in the context in which it was being delivered. It spoke of those who had grown up indoctrinated in a system of lies, built on lies, lies that were so blatant that the only way to maintain them was to punish severely those who in any way challenged them or even demurred at them. Of course, at the time, I realized how very fortunate we were that we lived in a quite different society where discussion was free and where there were no questions you could not ask. But that was then. For over 2,000 years in the Platonic and later the Christian world, the tradition of Western thought, human life was seen as orientated towards three great values: goodness, beauty, and truth. Each of them in turn seen as a manifestation of an aspect of the sacred. During my lifetime, I have seen each of these important values, along with the sacred, repudiated and reviled. Less and less attention is given these days to the inner nature of goodness as a disposition towards the world. Too often it seems that goodness has been reduced to rule following and good actions determined by a form of bloodless utilitarian accountancy. Beauty is dismissed as irrelevant in an era that respects only one value, namely power, so that no artist now wishes his or her art to be praised for its beauty, only for being powerful. And truth is dismissed, inevitably, as part of the rhetoric of power, supposedly decreed at whim to suit those who hold the power. Everyone, it is argued, is entitled to their own truth. What are we left with? Our only value seems to be the self-centered one of utility. But as Lessing pointed out in the 18th century, the utilitarian has to answer the question, useful for what? The question points onwards to the necessity of other values beyond those of mere power to manipulate. Without such further and greater values, we flounder, set adrift in a chaotic and meaningless world where our best bet would be to make our solitary, poor, nasty, and brutish lives at least as short as possible. As it turns out, this question of value, and particularly that of truth, leads us to consider what is known about lateralization in human brain function. I'm not going to spend time on the evidence here. For one thing, it's far too extensive, and for another, I've laid it out elsewhere for those who wish to examine it at leisure in great detail in two long books, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, published in 2009, and in a more recent book, The Matter with Things, Our Brains, Our Delusions, and the Unmaking of the World, published in 2021. In a nutshell, each hemisphere has evolved for Darwinian reasons to pay a different kind of attention to the world. The left hemisphere has evolved to pay narrow beam attention, focused, piecemeal, on a detail that we already know and desire and are intent on grabbing and getting, whether it be something to eat or to use in some other way. The left hemisphere exists in the service of manipulation. The right hemisphere, meanwhile, is on the lookout for everything else that is going on while we're intent on manipulation. For mates, conspecifics, offspring, and predators, so as not to be eaten while eating. Its attention is broad, sustained, coherent, vigilant. The right hemisphere is in the service of understanding the whole context.
Exactly.
Which is nothing less than everything else in the world. The difference then is not, as used to be supposed, to do with what each hemisphere does, so much as the way in which it does it. Each hemisphere is involved in everything we do, just in a consistently different way. The hemispheric difference in attention is not disputed. Indeed, it is universally attested. And since the nature of attention also indisputably changes what it is that comes to our attention, such a difference cannot but lead to two different phenomenological worlds. What are these two worlds like? Very briefly, if crudely, they could be characterized like this. In the case of the left hemisphere, a world of isolated, static things. Things, moreover, that are already known, familiar, predetermined, fixed. Of bits, fragments that are decontextualized, disembodied, meaningless, abstract, generic in nature, fungible, infinitely reproducible, quantifiable, mechanical. Useful then, but ultimately bloodless and lifeless. This is indeed not so much a world as a representation of a world, which means a world that is actually no longer present, but reconstructed after the fact. Two-dimensional, schematic, theoretical. And here the future is a fantasy that remains under our control. In the case of the right hemisphere, by contrast, there is a world of flowing processes, not isolated things. One where nothing is just fixed, entirely certain, exhaustively known, or fully predictable, but always changing and ultimately interconnected with everything else. Where what exists are wholes, of which what we call the parts are an artifact of our way of attending. Where what really matters is implicit, and must remain so, a world of uniqueness, one where quality is more important than quantity, a world that is essentially animate. Here, the future is a product of realism, not denial. This is a world that is fully present, rich and complex, a world of experience which calls for understanding, not a representation designed to submit reality to our manipulation. And White. Oh, I see the asterisks. Oh, there we are, yes. This is why, as Iain Whitehead observed, this is a very important point, a culture is in its finest flower before it begins to analyze itself. When our lives become very largely mediated by self-reflexive language and discourse, as in our postmodern world they are, we can no longer rely on the wisdom that comes from closeness to the long tradition of a society, to nature, and to the sacred, from narrative, myth, and ritual, from poetry, music, and drama, to sophisticate our understanding. Unfortunately, the two hemispheres are not equally veridical. In terms of our ability to apprehend, take hold of, and use the world, the left hemisphere is superior. But in terms of our ability to comprehend the world, the right hemisphere is superior. In each of what one might call the portals to understanding, attention, perception, judgment, emotional and social intelligence, cognitive intelligence, in other words, IQ, and creativity, the right hemisphere is so much superior that the left hemisphere is on its own, has been repeatedly described as frankly delusional. That is not a rhetorical expression. Denial of the facts and delusional beliefs are far commoner in association with damage to the right hemisphere, and consequently dependence on the left hemisphere, than the reverse. On its own, the left hemisphere confabulates, makes up stories so as to fit with its beliefs. It will frankly insist that the paralyzed limb is unaffected, or, if challenged, deny that the offending appendage belongs to the subject at all. It's yours, Doctor. The right hemisphere sees more than one angle and has for this reason been called by V.S. Ramachandran the devil's advocate. The left hemisphere doesn't doubt that it is right. It's never wrong and never at fault. Someone else is always to blame. Furthermore, in what I take to be the four important onward paths towards truth, science, reason, intuition, and imagination, though both hemispheres contribute, the crucial part in each case, including in science and reason, is played by the right hemisphere, not the left. Our predicament is that we now live in a world the understanding of which is largely limited to that of the inferior left hemisphere. Some signs of this include our inability to see the broader picture, the way in which wisdom has been lost, understanding reduced to knowledge, and knowledge replaced by information, tokens, or representations, the loss of the concepts of skill and judgment, the divorce of mind and matter, resulting in a strong tendency to simultaneous abstraction and the debasement of matter to mere lumpen matter for our exploitation, an exponential growth of bureaucracy and administration, everywhere the proceduralization of life, the reduction of justice to mere equality, a loss of the sense of the uniqueness of all things, the supplanting of quality by quantity, the abandonment of nuance in favor of black and white judgments, the adoption of simplistic either-or positions, the loss of reasonableness, which is replaced by rationalization, a complete disregard of common sense, the design of systems not for humans but to maximize utility, deterioration in social cohesion, a growth of paranoia and pervasive mistrust, for if all is not under its control, the left hemisphere becomes anxious and projects its anxiety outwards onto others. Nonetheless, we play the passive victim and abjure responsibility for our own lives. In addition, I might point to the rise of anger and aggression in the public sphere. Like almost everything that used to be said about hemisphere differences, the idea that the left hemisphere is unemotional is wrong. The most highly lateralized emotion is anger, and it lateralizes to the left hemisphere. And there are more indications, but for today's purpose, I'll stop there. I believe it is this intellectually jejune and morally bankrupt approach that has resulted in what has been called the meta-crisis, the destruction and despoliation of the natural world, the fragmentation and polarization of society, a surge in mental illness, a rise in violent crime, and so on. How does all this relate to what I see as the dereliction of truth? There are four main reasons, I think. One I have referred to, the quite literally less veridical, borderline delusional nature of the world constructed by the left hemisphere, the one that now provides our dominant narrative and mode, that of the machine. The second is that for the left hemisphere, the map is mistaken for the territory. The thinness and seductive simplicity of theory comes to trump the richness and complexity of experience. The third is related to this, in that the left hemisphere, unlike the right, prioritizes internal consistency with its model over contrary evidence from life. And the last I have mentioned, each hemisphere has different priorities. The left hemisphere evolved so as to be principally in service of utility and power, so as to grab and get, exploit and manipulate. The right hemisphere goes beyond to those other values that answer the question, utility for what? Values, therefore, such as goodness, beauty, and truth, which are, in my view, not just the necessary foundations of a functional society, but the grounds of human flourishing. Indeed, elsewhere I argue that it is our capacity for love and our capacity to respond to those values and help nourish them that explains our coming into existence at all.
There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was the Belly of Tea. The winds blew up her bud, up down, up below my bully boys blow. Soon may the Wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
She'd not been 2 weeks from shore when down on her a right whale bore. The captain called all hands and swore he'd take that whale in tow.
Soon may the Wellerman come